Krzychu, what do we have on the menu today?
Damn, you know what? Today I am talking to one such bark beetle. And you might be surprised. Bark beetle conversation. But it's just a nickname. Bark beetle is actually Jacek Prądzyński, our specialist and boss at Robinia, who today will probably crush me with his knowledge and experience. Well, but what can you do? You have to take on the challenge. So yeah, I'm getting ready for it. When talking about Robinia in general, it's hard to avoid such an issue as the price of this wood. Is that everything you're talking about? Is that what makes this wood so expensive, or are there any other features of this wood? And that, well, in the end, it costs so much?
Yes, above all, it's because the wood is of very high quality, meaning that it is durable and long-lasting, since as a type of wood, it belongs to the first and second class of resistance to degradation. So in such humid, standard, airy conditions, it is estimated that it lasts around 20 to 30, 40 years. However, in dry conditions, it can last for hundreds of years.
At least a few controversial issues have arisen around the wood known as robinia. And the first issue I'd like to ask you about is its cracking. What causes these cracks, and do they pose any danger on the playground? Or is it rather normal? How do you see it from your perspective?
These micro cracks and small cracks will in no way affect the functionality or safety of the playground. However, large cracks, the so-called splitting of posts, and here again we need to distinguish between two typical types of cracks. We have tangential or radial cracks. Visually, we can say that if you see one large crack from the end, you can see through to the other side, from the other side. In that case, such a crack is undesirable. If we're talking about a crack that you see from the end face, like a wedge of cheese, there used to be those small processed cheese wedges for sale. I
thought of a cake.
Or a piece of cake, that's actually a very good example. In that case, we're talking about a crack that isn't a threat to the child. In general, wood will change if it's exposed outdoors. And actually not just outdoors. Let me use a completely different example. All of us are surely familiar with pine wood, and at some point something was lying on that wood, especially on floors. After some time we lift the rug and what do we see? Two different colors of wood.
Right.
Exactly. It's very similar here. Robinia also changes color and will continue to change color. There are many factors that influence this. First and foremost, we're talking about ultraviolet rays here, which, when reacting with the surface of the wood, will cause it to lose its color. We're also talking about water, which will wash out certain elements from the wood structure. Some components that protect the wood, and by removing them, it allows other factors to act, which will lead to its biodegradation. Another aspect could be that nowadays we often talk about acid rain, so that's some kind of chemicals coming from above, which can also affect the discoloration of this structure. Of the wood, right? So there are really a lot of factors that can discolor wood used outdoors. Robinia, it is fortunate in that it ages into a nice silvery color. And here, just like you, I agree that we shouldn't interfere with this natural color change.
Dzień dobry, Jacek. Witam cię serdecznie. Good morning, Jacek. I warmly welcome you. Today, I have to tell you we're in for quite a treat because we're going to talk about Robinia pseudocasia, which we're using more and more at Buglo in our products. This is a type of wood that you can probably tell us more about than I ever could, but maybe before we get into that, could you tell us a bit about yourself?
Witaj, Krzysztofie. Hello, Krzysztof. I've been working at Buglo for a little over 2 years. At first I was hired as a wood technologist. This of course concerns working with and handling wood in the production of our playgrounds. Equipment. A year ago I was given responsibility for processing this wood, in the full sense of the word, meaning responsibility for the entire hall producing wooden playgrounds. I have over 35 years of experience. Including my time at school, I have been working with wood. I spent over 25 years in a factory producing wooden products. For the past 2 years I've been here, and somewhere in between, in the margins. a few months of teaching, but generally the wood industry.
Okay, so you could say you know wood like the back of your hand.
Probably not, but I do know quite a lot.
But I assume that's your nickname? Kornik, right? Is that where it comes from?
That's right. One day, one of my co-workers, to distinguish between the two Jaceks working at Google, decided that one would be Jacek and the other would be Kornik because he works with wood.
All right, so we've started off pretty nicely, but let's move on to the topic of our conversation, namely this robinia. Maybe we could start with you explaining to me why robinia is actually a good wood. Why is it suitable for making playgrounds?
Robinia wood. Of course, it is a completely natural product. So nowadays, when everyone is actively seeking out and striving to utilize natural, recyclable materials that do not cause any environmental degradation, it is probably the absolute primary choice. That is exactly why our clients see it as such a highly valuable and environmentally responsible product. However, among the various types of wood that Baglo has tested throughout its history, several or even a dozen or so since I've only been working here for 2 years, so there were certainly other studies before it's the experience and characteristics of this wood, and that led to it being chosen as the primary essential product and as the fundamental core material for high-quality playground production. The wood of the robinia tree is not very commonly encountered in Poland. When it comes to large-scale industrial applications or specialized forestry production, it generally grows in significantly warmer and more temperate climatic regions, and interestingly, is frequently found in areas characterized by notably poor or depleted soil fertility. As a natural forest product, meaning as a living tree, or rather as harvested wood, it is a unique material that is remarkably and highly resistant to the various long-term effects of natural biodegradation. This remarkable resistance is primarily thanks to the unique fact that its internal molecular structure contains specific chemical compounds and specialized elements that simply do not interact with any known types of invasive fungi, organic mold, or other common biological growths that typically cause decay in similar materials over time. Additionally, this is a remarkably dense and heavy type of wood, which means it is a substantial material that will inevitably take a significantly longer amount of time to work with, degrade. It also has a nice color, as its hue is yellow-golden. However, as it ages, it develops a beautiful silvery sheen.
Whenever we are discussing the topic of robinia wood in a general sense, it is truly difficult to avoid bringing up the important subject of the market price for this particular type of timber. Is everything you've mentioned the reason why this wood is so expensive? Are there any other features of this wood? And is that why, in the end, it costs so much?
Yes, above all, it's because the wood is of very high quality, meaning that it is durable and long-lasting, as it belongs to the first or second class of resistance to degradation. So, in humid or standard atmospheric conditions, it is estimated that this falls within different ranges, 20 to 30, 40 years. However, in dry conditions, it can last for hundreds of years. Additionally, we really have to be very clear about the fact that robinia is certainly not a common type of wood that you would expect to find everywhere in our local forests. As I mentioned earlier in our discussion, it primarily grows in much warmer climate zones and is quite often found thriving on sandy soils that are generally not very fertile at all. So there isn't a lot of it on the market either. In fact, you could say there is little of it on the market, and its properties and characteristics, which make it suitable for outdoor use, are thanks to its structure and the presence of various chemical substances, phenols, oils, and so on. This makes it a highly sought-after wood in many industries, especially in the gas industry, the shipbuilding industry, telegraph poles, for example. Another aspect is that the tree does not grow never perfectly straight. It is not a species that readily grows upright like spruces or pines in our Polish forests. Instead, it is a deciduous wood that often has many branches. Harvesting raw material from this tree is difficult and therefore also expensive.
All right then, so we have wood that is very durable, It's quite expensive, but it has a few controversial aspects. At least a few of these controversial issues have arisen around the wood known as robinia. And the first issue I'd like to ask you about is its cracking. What causes these cracks, and do they pose any danger on a playground? Or is it rather normal? How do you see it from your perspective?
You could look at it from this perspective, any wood that is recently harvested and green and has not undergone the correct seasoning or treatment process in the right way is inevitably going to warp and crack over time. It's a purely physical process. The outer parts of the trunk or sawn materials dry faster, while the inner parts dry more slowly. This causes stresses to form, which eventually appear as cracks. Of course, many factors contribute to this, such as, for example, the presence of knots, any structural issues with the tree itself, or disturbances in the grain pattern due to human intervention. Someone once struck it, someone once chipped off a piece somewhere. When you take a piece like this and so on, all of these different factors cause the wood to behave in a way that is completely different than what you would usually expect. Cracks will definitely start to form throughout the material, but once the moisture levels in the specific piece we're using finally even out, it will stabilize absolutely. The amount of cracking will be significantly reduced, or it may not occur at all. So in fact, I could say that the cracking of the wood will stop once the moisture content is the same throughout the entire cross-section of the material used to make a given element of our structure.
And is this a specific period of time that we can average out?
It all depends on how thick it is, how long it is, and so on and so forth. But I would estimate that it's about a year to a year and a half. That's roughly how long it takes. However, what is worth emphasizing and should be strongly emphasized is that in bungalow playgrounds, we try to prevent this because all the round elements we use are secured by pinning.
And that's exactly what I wanted to ask about.
All elements that protrude above the ground are additionally screwed together to specifically prevent this splitting of the components. When it comes to cracks, we also have to say that not all cracks that appear are dangerous, because there are both microcracks, regular cracks, and large fractures. These microcracks and small cracks will not, under any circumstances, affect the functionality or safety of the playground. However, large cracks, the so-called splitting of posts, and here again we need to distinguish between two typical types of cracks. We have tangential or radial cracks. We can put it this way. Visually, if you see one large crack from the end face and you can see through to the other side, then such a crack is definitely undesirable. If we are talking about a crack that you see from the end face of the log, much like a wedge of cheese, even a small one like that. Products like Czerek and Topionek used to be widely available for sale.
Thought of a cake.
Or a piece of cake, that's a really good example. In that case, we're talking about a crack like that, and it's not a danger to a child, because with the expertise of our standards that we use, our engineers from the development department described this a long time ago. In our warranty conditions, in our equipment operating conditions, which cracks are safe, which are dangerous, or which are subject to complaints, or even the replacement of components.
Okay, so since you already mentioned that, it's worth taking a closer look at the crack and understanding what kind of crack it is. I assume that you also have some kind of quality control, that when these posts arrive, these black locust beams, you inspect them. Is that really the case?
Yes. Wood material as our primary material used in production is of course subjected to detailed inspection. Before the material is taken into production, each post is examined by our associates, our employees, and if it meets the requirements, it is then directed further into production. All posts that do not meet such requirements are reported to the supplier, and then we come to an agreement whether we shorten its length due to a defect present in a certain part, or we return part of the batch to the supplier. I can briefly say that this is from a few to several % of each delivery, so it is really rigorous. It should also be emphasized that all our timber materials that we use, and we use not only robinia, after all have quality requirements that our clients are familiar with. Clients know what they are sending to us, and they have to take responsibility so that, for example, goods that do not meet our standards are not shipped to us.
All right, and at the beginning of our conversation, you mentioned the beautiful color of this robinia. I also agree that it is beautiful at the very beginning, right after it has been polished and sanded. But the next controversial topic I'd like to bring up is the change in its color, which you also mentioned. Personally, I really like it. I like it when a material changes over time, when it gains some new value. That's something interesting to me. But what does it look like? What causes this wood to change color? And does, for example, a rapid change in color indicate, I don't know, poor quality of the wood? Or is that not necessarily the case? Is it just a natural characteristic?
Absolutely not. In general, wood will change if it's exposed to the outdoors, and actually not just outdoors. Let me give you a completely different example. All of us are surely familiar with pine wood, and at some point something was lying on that wood, especially on floors. After some time we lift up the rug and what do we see? Two different colors of wood. Exactly. It's very similar here. Robinia also changes color and will continue to change color. There are many factors that influence this. First and foremost, we are talking about ultraviolet rays here, which when reacting with the surface of the wood will cause it to lose its color. We're also talking about water, which will wash out certain components from the wood's structure, certain elements that protect the wood, and as a result, this allows those elements to act, which will cause its biodegradation. Another aspect could be that, after all, we can encounter various conditions. Nowadays, we often talk about acid rain, so that's a kind of chemical substance coming from above, which can also affect the discoloration of this structure, of the wood. So there are really a lot of factors that can cause discoloration of wood used outdoors. Robinia, it has the good fortune that, as it ages, its color changes to a nice silvery shade. And here, just like you, I agree that we shouldn't interfere with this natural color change. That doesn't change the fact that there are clients, and we do get inquiries from our customers asking if we can oil the wood to preserve its color. I'll answer it this way: yes. The condition is that, in the future, the client will need to maintain and renew that structure.
That's exactly
another important thing. Otherwise, unfortunately, we won't have a good color. In fact, we'll end up with an ugly color.
That's exactly what I wanted to ask about. Is this a type of wood that requires any kind of maintenance? But I understand that's in the case of oiling it. Do you also need to take care of it even without oiling?
Generally, yes, just like with any wood. Oiling is not a preservative, just so we're clear. Oiling is more of a method to prevent its color from changing due to external factors. Of course, it probably also protects the wood to some extent. However, acacia wood, because it contains phenols, tannins, and many other chemical substances, is actually reluctant to absorb any impregnating agents. This is one of the major industrial problems if someone really wants to impregnate it. Just as an interesting fact, I'll tell you that fluorescence also occurs in robinia wood. In other words, the wood glows at night. When you shine ultraviolet light on it, it can actually glow. Of course, the wood needs to be fresh and properly prepared, with the structure sanded, but such phenomena are visible, and this phenomenon also makes impregnation more difficult. Therefore, at Baglo, we take the position that robinia wood should not be impregnated. We do not recommend it. If someone really wants to apply an oil coating to preserve the original color of the wood for longer, it is possible. There have been a few customer inquiries about it, but so far, no one has decided to do it. It is an additional, fairly significant cost.
Earlier, I also mentioned the high durability of robinia, and here I would also like to ask about how resistant it is to vandalism. Is this wood flammable, for example, or should we expect that it can be damaged relatively easily, or is it a hard wood that... Well, okay, it can be damaged, but you really have to put in a lot of effort.
Robinia wood is a hard wood, but also flexible. So, as with any act of vandalism, there is a possibility of it being damaged. Of course, you would need to use very sharp objects, which children most likely do not have with them on playgrounds. Both, and that's important. But vandalism probably doesn't concern the children playing on the playgrounds, but rather completely different people. And here, of course, such elements can be damaged. Robin wood is a highly desirable material for burning in fireplaces. It possesses an exceptionally high calorific heating value. But like any other type of wood, it also has that remarkable and unique characteristic that once the external source of the ignition flame is removed, the wood itself will simply cease to continue burning on its own. For wood to burn, it constantly needs to have an open flame source around it. It will smolder, it won't burn quickly. That's why, of course, you can set a playground on fire, but you can expect that it won't be like the wood will be burned all the way through. However, as consumer clients who need wood for heating their homes, I definitely recommend it. Investment wood, absolutely.
Okay. As a graphic designer, I often come into contact with pieces of this construction wood just to take a closer look at its texture so I can try to recreate it later in visualizations. But even when playing around with a small block of it, I notice its weight. And knowing how irregular this wood is, how irregular it arrives to you, and its weight, tell me, maybe, how difficult is this wood to work with? Do you have any special methods for dealing with it, or do you just need brute force here?
Specjalne sposoby na to, czy po prostu trzeba tutaj brutalnej siły?
Well, these days brute force is generally out of the question. However, when it comes to working with the wood itself, it's about its density. Its density doesn't matter that much when it comes to processing it at Buglow, because we don't saw this wood, we don't obtain sawn materials from it. Sawmills definitely struggle with this and have to work quite hard because, as I mentioned, we're talking about density here. A very high wood density. It's one of the heaviest types of wood that exists. However, for us, a much bigger problem when processing the wood is something else. For us, however, the shape of the trunk is the main issue. It's extremely irregular, as is often the case with hardwoods. As for the mechanical processing itself, it is done with hand tools and, of course, requires a lot of strength from our workers. However, this is no longer the kind of primitive work with a chisel and hammer, but rather with power tools that are electrically driven. So yes, there is still a lot of manual work involved here because the irregularity of the trunk does not. At present, it does not allow us to build a machine that could process it automatically. On the other hand, using tools allows us to create such great works as the ones we produce.
You could say that the value of these toys is also influenced by the fact that they are almost handmade. In a way, sculpture comes into play here.
I would say, above all. Please check. Have you ever come across Buglow and Uda playgrounds in Poland? You will find a few of the same elements on the playgrounds, but each one will look different. So it is absolutely handmade, and that's the direction we should be looking at here.
That needs to be emphasized. All right, but since we're already talking about these playgrounds, maybe you can tell me, is there any risk at all that a child playing on such equipment could, in any way, or simply get a splinter in their finger?
W jakimś stopniu, czy po prostu wbije sobie drzazgę w palec, żeby nie przedłużać.
We've already talked about vandalism. We have no control over that. If a beam is damaged, then yes, absolutely, it's wood. Any wood can give you a splinter. However, here again, we should return to what Buglow strongly encourages. The people and companies who purchase our playgrounds to do. In our playground usage guidelines, we talk about inspections and minor repairs on the playground. So if you see a crack in the wood, take some sandpaper and smooth out that edge. If you see a part that's sticking out, take sandpaper, take the right tool and fix it.
But I also understand that such a situation, such a risk can occur when the product is already on the playground and gets damaged to some extent. But when it leaves the company, so poor, this work table, is it sanded in any way? Are these boards processed at all before they end up on the playground?
Of course. Every piece of wood that leaves the Buglo company undergoes a very rigorous quality control. This means that the surfaces of the wood must be sanded, there can't be any visible or protruding fragments of wood, and there can't be any damage, tears, or mechanical defects. Every single edge on the various components that make up the entire playground area must be properly and thoroughly secured by giving them the most appropriate rounding or the necessary beveling of the sharp edges. So, absolutely, when we talk about a playground that is 100% assembled at Boglo, and this needs to be emphasized every time, every wooden product made at Boglo is assembled from start to finish and checked for compliance with the standards. That means safety for children, but also the quality of its workmanship. And
when the wood arrives here, does it have to be stored for a while in a warehouse under special conditions, or can it actually be used right away? So, does it arrive and immediately get taken for the production of a new device?
the company Buglo makes sure that we use only such wood. We try to plan our purchases so that there is always a certain stock lying in the yard. It's about securing the supply of raw material when it comes to round timber. This is because we want the larger cracks that might form to appear already in the first phase of the wood drying process. And thanks to this, by removing those parts of the log that are heavily cracked, we can ensure that such large cracks will not appear in the finished devices. When it comes to HMM materials like boards or beams, our suppliers' quality requirements clearly state that we are talking about wood with a certain moisture content. Specifically air-dried wood, which is the kind you typically find outdoors. Our purchasing team tries to buy this kind of wood for us, and that's the type we use, so in this case we're talking about sawn materials. There's no need for anything else. As for round wood, Boglo tries to keep such stocks on hand, but with these, the first large cracks can simply be cut off.
Okay, and do you ever find any knots in this wood? How do you handle them when you find them, if you find them?
Yes, well, acacia wood is just like any other wood that grows around us. Knots do occur, of course, because let me go back to the requirements. The first level of quality control for these knots is our suppliers. We specify that the knots must be healthy, there can't be any sign of rot, and if there is a slightly loose or damaged knot, there can be only one, for example, over a certain length, 5 meters. If there are a lot of such knots and they are really badly damaged, the knot is eliminated during the process of selecting elements for the devices. On the other hand, all small knots that are healthy are the most acceptable. They don't cause any problems, in fact they actually enhance the appearance of the beam. However, if they are partially damaged, they are repaired and secured in such a way that the cavity does not widen or deepen.
Okay, I understand. Here at Buglo we have a system for controlling and checking the quality of the wood. But do we also have any certificates for the glued laminated timber?
Yes, Boglo uses only and exclusively verified supply sources. Every single one of our trusted suppliers has and also exclusively uses high-quality wood that is fully FSC certified. And there are no exceptions to this rule. I can also add that in the case of our glued laminated wood elements, here we're talking about components for products like Eco or Dino, these products, in addition to the FSC certificate, also have the GL24H certificate. This is a special certificate. It specifies the bending strength of the beam. And a very important feature of this certificate is the letter H, because it means that every layer of this element has exactly the same parameters. There is also a C version, which means that only the outer zones, that is the 2 outer layers, will have this strength, while the inner layers do not have to. In our case, we use only a proven product and only with full strength, because we care about the safety of the youngest.
Beautifully said. Having worked in this field for so long, whether with us or with your 30 years of experience in general, do you notice any trends at all when it comes to wood, specifically robinia acacia, in the context of playgrounds? Do clients surprise you with any innovations here, or do you see which direction this might be heading? Are they asking for bigger and bigger structures? Are there elements that are painted, for example, or do you notice anything like that?
Yes, definitely. I've been working with this for 2 years, but even within those 2 years, you can already see a big change. Just 2 years ago, clients were mostly buying smaller structures, lower ones. Over the past 2 years, that has changed. So much so that today we're already talking about medium-sized tall structures. However, at the last trade fair in Cologne, the company Buglo, following the market trend, they presented their latest product, which is the Mega Robinia, whose beams are almost 7 meters long, making it a very tall structure. And here, when it comes to the wood, there are no changes. It's still Robinia. And here, in the context of constructing products and their height and size, I would say this is the direction things are heading. And of course, regarding the area, because the latest orders we received from our colleagues at QRM included a massive castle set consisting of 4 towers, which looks absolutely beautiful here for Hania. I think it will also be very well received at the Zobov playground. Another trend that can be seen on the market is becoming more and more common. There are more inquiries about painted robinia. Here, Buglo is also moving in this direction and is securing itself technologically. We carried out a series of tests with various suppliers of wood painting chemicals and chose a company that, as one of the few on the market, one could even say worldwide, takes pride in having the so-called Blue Swan certificate. This is a certificate that is highly demanded in the Scandinavian market, and we use these products ourselves. To protect these products against faster deterioration of the paint coating, we have recently developed a special system with this company using their primer, which is a substance that activates the surface. It acts as a kind of connector between the wood and the paint coating. Our dedicated QRM employees here at Buglo also maintain a comprehensive list of specific colors that our trusted business partner is able to prepare for us. And here too, they possess a really great depth of professional knowledge regarding which of these particular colors are more or less resistant. For example, they understand how they hold up against the long-term effects of harsh UV rays.
That's exactly what I wanted to get to as well. Do these colors also change if we paint some parts of the robinia? So just as it changes its color over time, can the paint also change its color along with the wood?
Yes, absolutely. Every painted coating changes its color under the influence of light. Yes, and here we have a similar situation. There are colors that are more resistant to the effects of light and some that are less so. I think many homemakers or men who run households today have encountered a situation where they hung a nice shirt outside. And in the evening they took it down and it wasn't the same color. It's similar here, except that the fading takes longer. We're not talking about just a day or two, but a longer period.
Of course, there are some guarantees as well which specify either the durability of the wood or the durability of the paint coating on robinia wood.
Yes, all the parameters of our products are listed in the warranty cards. In the case of I don't remember exactly how much it is, the number of years for robinia, but there is definitely at least a 10-year warranty on robinia wood, so these playgrounds will certainly last a generation.
When you told me about the process of making products from robinia, I got the impression that each of these products is a modification, that it's hard to plan a system according to which the products are later mass-produced. And actually, these modifications are something I'd like to ask about. Do a lot of them just come up? You mentioned QRM, those creative project departments of ours. Do a lot of such topics come in, or is it still mostly standard products? Are clients becoming more open to modifying these devices?
Over the past 2 years, I've been working at Bungalow. I can say that the number of modified products has at least doubled. As an interesting fact, I can add that in the last 6 months, the number of modifications range between 11 and 38% per month.
Okay.
Well, I know those statistics, yes, from today's work. This is our bestseller, and I think it's currently in first place when it comes to overall product sales, so that's an incredible change. It only appeared recently, and yet it has already won over our customers. Well, it's as amazing as your work and knowledge, Jacek.
Thanks.
It was a pleasure talking with you, but I think we can start wrapping up now. Thank you so much for this conversation. I hope this will be very interesting for everyone, or at least as interesting as it was for me, which is incredibly so. And thank you. I hope we'll meet again someday and have another chat.
Thanks. You're always welcome, and if I can be of any help, I'd be happy to share more on this topic.
Thanks.
Thanks.